My parents tried to sell my home for my brother's wedding, a tale of betrayal, resilience, and triumph. At 35, I had finally achieved what felt like an impossible dream, purchasing my first home. After years of relentless work and meticulous financial planning, I secured a modest but charming sanctuary in a peaceful neighborhood. While not a palatial estate, it represented everything I had sacrificed and strived for. My haven, my achievement, my home. When I shared the news with my parents, their initial enthusiasm seemed genuine. They eagerly offered to assist with minor renovations, presenting it as their way of celebrating this milestone in my life. I envisioned simple improvements, perhaps a fresh coat of paint or some basic landscaping. Little did I know their helpful visits would spiral into something far more sinister. Soon, my home became an impromptu tourist attraction. My parents paraded an endless stream of visitors through my property. Elderly neighbors, distant relatives, casual acquaintances. While slightly overwhelming, I dismissed it as parental pride, especially since they had always lavished attention on my younger brother, Michael, 32. Michael, the eternal golden child. Despite being 3 years my junior, he had always commanded the spotlight. Growing up, his every whim was indulged. If he desired the latest gaming system, he received the deluxe edition. Designer clothes? Multiple credit cards at his disposal. Now, he was engaged to a woman whose expensive tastes matched his own, though her bank account didn't quite align with her aspirations. I barely registered my parents' increasing anxiety about the mounting wedding expenses. Their determination to create an extravagant celebration for their precious son seemed typical. Then, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. My parents began probing about my home's value, outstanding mortgage, and refinancing options. Their sudden interest in my financial affairs raised no immediate red flags. I naively attributed it to newfound parental concern. When they invited me to dinner and requested I bring my property documentation, I complied, albeit reluctantly. Looking back, my compliance seems frighteningly naive. The first crack in their facade appeared when neighbors mentioned seeing my house listed online. I dismissed these comments until a friend forwarded a real estate listing featuring interior photos of my home, images captured during my parents' renovation visits. My blood turned to ice as reality crashed down around me. Armed with irrefutable evidence, I confronted my parents. Their initial attempts at deflection, claiming they were exploring options should I ever decide to sell, crumbled under my persistent questioning. Finally, the truth emerged. They had listed my house to help finance Michael's dream wedding. Their justification was breathtaking in its audacity. Since I had achieved my dream of homeownership, they argued, it was only fair to ensure Michael could have his perfect wedding. They spoke of my home's equity as if it were a family resource, their sense of entitlement staggering. The few renovation projects they'd assisted with apparently granted them authority over my property. When I firmly declared my house wasn't for sale and wouldn't finance Michael's extravagant nuptials, they unleashed every manipulation tactic imaginable. Emotional blackmail, guilt trips, references to past sacrifices. They wielded each weapon with practiced precision. They painted my refusal as a betrayal of family values, a rejection of both Michael's happiness and familial unity. Then came Michael's tearful, rage-filled phone call. He berated me as selfish, claiming my refusal to sacrifice my home for his wedding day revealed my ingratitude for years of family support. Despite the pain his words inflicted, I stood firm. My home wasn't a piggy bank for his matrimonial extravagance. When I confided in my close friends about this surreal situation, their immediate support became my anchor. They validated my right to protect my property and condemned my family's inappropriate behavior. However, as word spread through our extended family, battle lines were drawn. While some relatives recognized the absurdity of listing my house without consent, others rallied behind my parents, preaching about family unity and sacrifice. In this twisted narrative, I had somehow become the villain, the selfish daughter who valued bricks and mortar over family bonds. The situation reached its breaking point when my parents delivered their ultimate ultimatum: voluntarily sell my house or face complete familial excommunication. The surreal nature of being threatened with disownment over a wedding that wasn't even mine left me reeling. Throughout this ordeal, my fiancé Thomas, 37, proved to be my unwavering pillar of strength. His understanding of my situation ran deeper than my family's ever had, and his perspective helped illuminate my path forward. While Michael pursued his grandiose wedding plans, Thomas and I had been quietly planning our own modest, intimate ceremony. One unexpected ally emerged in this familial chaos: my grandfather William, 77. He had always maintained a critical view of my parents' favoritism and shared a special bond with me, often saying I reminded him of my late grandmother. His support provided a stark contrast to the family's pressure, though Michael, ever the entitled child, attempted to dismiss it by claiming our mother's superior affection. The depths of my parents' preferential treatment became crystal clear when I discovered they had previously furnished Michael with funds for both a car and house, when he received his football scholarship years ago. Meanwhile, I had struggled through college, working multiple jobs and accumulating student loans. When questioned about my depleted college fund, they claimed it had been used for post-fire bills at Michael's University, a convenient excuse that now rang hollow. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, I sought legal counsel. My attorney recommended several protective measures, emphasizing that while my family couldn't legally sell my house without consent, I needed to safeguard against potential interference. Following their advice, I changed all locks and secured important documents. But my parents weren't finished. They took their campaign to social media, crafting dramatic posts portraying me as a heartless sister who selfishly hoarded resources that could fulfill my brother's dreams. Their theatrical performances sparked a barrage of comments from friends and relatives who knew nothing of the true circumstances. In the midst of this chaos, Thomas provided an unexpected solution. We had been secretly planning our own wedding, something small but meaningful, surrounded by those who truly cared about us. He suggested keeping the details from my family until everything was arranged, knowing their history of turning events into Michael drama. As I write this, I find myself at a crossroads between self-preservation and familial love. My home represents years of hard work and determination. I refuse to surrender it for someone else's extravagant desires. Yet the constant emotional manipulation and pressure were heavily on my spirit. While I know I'm right, standing firm against family feels like scaling a mountain in a thunderstorm. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with my grandfather to discuss our wedding plans. He remains the one family member I trust implicitly, and his support means everything. Whatever my parents throw at me next, I pray I maintain the strength to stand my ground. First update, 3 weeks later. The situation has deteriorated in predictable, yet devastating ways. After receiving my attorney's cease and desist letter, my parents finally removed the real estate listing, but their response was far from contrite. Instead, they accused me of legal harassment, branding the letter as the ultimate betrayal. Their stance remained unshakable. My selfish refusal to assist with Michael's wedding was creating unnecessary family strife. That letter became the catalyst for our growing estrangement. My mother, with tears in her eyes that seemed more performative than genuine, lamented how I had turned against them, choosing money over love. Rather than accepting responsibility, they intensified their social media campaign. Their posts, carefully crafted to paint me as the monster tearing the family apart over mere money, were vague enough to mislead anyone unaware of the true circumstances. Soon, family friends and distant relatives began flooding their comments with support, while my inbox filled with messages of scorn and condemnation. Just when I thought the situation couldn't escalate further, Michael decided to confront me directly. He appeared at my doorstep, his face contorted with self-righteous fury. "You have no right to keep this house to yourself when the family needs it for something as important as my wedding," he declared, insisting it had always been family property and accusing me of being jealous of his happiness. Maintaining my composure, I firmly restated that I wouldn't sell the house I had purchased with my own hard-earned money. He stormed off, his rage seemingly amplified by my calm defiance. The next day brought fresh demands from my parents. Since I wasn't willing to sell the house, they insisted I provide a substantial loan instead. They argued that as family, I owed it to them to contribute in whatever way possible to Michael's once-in-a-lifetime event. Keeping my voice steady, I declined, explaining that their demands were completely inappropriate and had nothing to do with me. Their response was swift and brutal. All communication ceased. Family gatherings no longer included invitations for me, and complaints from other family members about my alienating behavior began rolling in. It was clear my parents were attempting to isolate me, hoping the pressure would force my compliance. While the emotional toll has been immense, my close friends have been my bedrock of support. Their constant reassurance that I'm doing the right thing has helped me maintain my resolve. I honestly don't know how I would have stayed strong without them. A few days ago, I received a call from the real estate agent who had previously visited my house. Though they confirmed my parents had finally removed the listing after the cease and desist letter, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. My instincts proved correct when I noticed subtle signs of tampering with my locks one evening at home. While the changes were barely perceptible, years of hypervigilance had taught me to trust my gut. I immediately contacted a locksmith to replace every lock. After everything that had transpired, I couldn't risk taking chances. I didn't want to believe my own family could sink this low, but I'm beginning to see everything with painful clarity. To process the emotional trauma of this familial betrayal, I've started therapy. Each session uncovers layers of manipulation and shame I didn't even realize were affecting me. My therapist is helping me understand how deeply these family dynamics are rooted and the crucial importance of establishing boundaries, even perhaps especially within family. Meanwhile, Thomas and I have continued with our wedding preparations in private. Having at least one supportive family member means the world. and my grandfather William has been instrumental in helping us organize everything. We're planning something small but significant, exactly what we both want. The contrast between our approach and Michael's extravagant plans couldn't be more stark. The hardest part of all this has been watching my parents continue their smear campaign within the extended family. They're crafting a narrative where I'm the selfish, egotistical daughter who values money over family unity. Since word spread, I've been receiving letters from relatives I haven't seen in years, all expressing their disappointment and accusing me of destroying family harmony. I've begun recording every interaction with Michael, my parents, and any family members who contact me. I want a detailed record of everything said and done in case the situation escalates further. Keeping this documentation also helps me feel more in control of the situation, as if I'm finally taking proactive steps to properly protect myself. Despite the chaos, I'm finding my resolve growing stronger. Every story they spread, every attempt to guilt-trip me, only serves to reinforce that I've made the right choice. I will not allow anyone, not even family, to destroy the life I've carefully built for myself. I'll provide another update when I have more to share, but Thomas and I are moving forward with our plans. Your support means more than you can imagine, so thank you all. Second update, months later. Everything has changed since my last update. Yes, I married Thomas last weekend, without Michael or my parents present. Let me share what transpired. Our intimate ceremony was everything we dreamed of, attended only by our closest friends, Thomas's family, and my grandfather William, who proudly walked me down the aisle. His eyes glistened with pride and joy as he gave me away. When guests inquired about my parents' absence, I simply mentioned they had prior commitments at Michael's game. Grandfather had initially expressed reservations about our secrecy, but after witnessing the peace and happiness of our celebration, he fully understood our decision. A storm was brewing as we returned from our brief, blissful honeymoon, completely disconnected from the world. Before I could even unlock my phone, I was bombarded with notifications, primarily vitriolic messages from Michael and my mother. Michael's texts were particularly venomous, filled with expletives and accusations. The catalyst? My aunt had shared our wedding photos on Facebook, accompanied by a pointed comment about my parents' absence. As the post gained traction, their carefully constructed social circle began questioning their treatment of me. The situation reached a breaking point when my grandfather paid my parents a visit to share his thoughts. This proved to be the final straw for my father. For the first time in decades, he confronted my mother, threatening divorce if she didn't make amends. The combination of missing his daughter's wedding and facing criticism from his own father had finally shattered his passive acceptance. My parents' messages evolved from rage to desperate pleading. I'm now receiving significant backlash from my mother's sisters and their social circle for not announcing my wedding. Many family members, including those not invited, are expressing regret, claiming they were unaware of the severity of the situation at home. The truth is, I did inform my parents about my upcoming marriage. They received formal invitations, just like everyone else. When Michael, my parents, and a few distant relatives failed to RSVP, I followed up with everyone else who had responded. Those who didn't RSVP cited various commitments. When I attempted to discuss the wedding with my brother and mother, they dismissed me, saying other matters were more pressing and I should stop being a nuisance. In retrospect, I should have recognized their dismissal as the final sign I needed. I didn't hide my wedding. I simply stopped highlighting it to them, hoping they might show even a glimmer of interest. My aunts and uncles heard me mention the wedding multiple times. Sometimes my mother was even present, offering only a dismissive "that's nice, dear," before changing the subject. After high school, college, and graduate school, I tried maintaining distance, but they always pulled me back using my mother's sisters and grandparents as emotional leverage. This time feels different, perhaps because Thomas's presence has given me newfound strength and confidence. Yet, I still face difficult decisions ahead. The situation has been chaotic. Most of my father's family lives across the country, and I've long been uncertain about their perspective. While I maintained contact with Dad's side, I never mentioned the abuse after my initial attempt at age 14. Back then, my grandfather, uncles, and aunts had confronted my parents, but the severe punishment I received at home led me to convince myself I had imagined it all. Only grandfather knew the truth, constantly worried that his intervention might cause me to resent him. It's worth noting that I now live in a different town from my parents. They barely know my current address. This precaution stems from Michael's previous attempt to break into my old apartment to steal money, an incident my mother defended by claiming siblings share things. Regarding my cousin, she was the one who pointed out how deeply my father was affected by his absence at my wedding. They had previously ostracized her for turning her back on family over a minor incident, eventually cutting her off completely. Yesterday, I sent my father a message requesting a meeting with him, my mother, and Michael at a neutral location. He responded immediately, agreeing to meet. My father's siblings are joining us at the park where we're gathering. presumably to prevent any potential harm. When we arrived at the park, my father looked devastated, as he had been for days. For now, I'm focusing on enjoying my new life with Thomas, though I know decisions about my family relationships loom on the horizon. We're eager to begin this new chapter together, free from the manipulation and chaos that have characterized my past. Final update, the reckoning. The park meeting I mentioned turned out to be a pivotal moment that no one anticipated. I'm finally ready to share what transpired and how I ultimately took control of my life. When I arrived at the park, the tension was palpable. Michael couldn't meet my eyes, my mother wore her characteristic self-righteous expression, and my father looked utterly defeated. My father's siblings were present, ostensibly as mediators, but I came armed with my own protection. My lawyer on speed dial, a folder of documented evidence, and an unshakable resolve to end this on my terms. Before anyone could speak, I placed a thick folder on the park bench between us. This, I declared, opening the folder, is every text, email, social media post, and legal document showing your attempts to steal my house. It also includes evidence of financial fraud. I fixed my mother with an unwavering stare. Remember those college fund records you claimed were destroyed in a fire? Grandfather kept copies. Interesting how that money ended up in Michael's accounts. The color drained from my mother's face. Michael started to protest, but I cut him off. I'm not finished. I also have surveillance footage and documentation of your attempted break-in at my previous apartment, not to mention the recent tampering with my house locks. When my father attempted to apologize, I raised my hand. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to tell you exactly what happens next. I produced a paper showing compound interest calculations and a detailed list of everything they'd stolen from my college fund. You have two choices, I continued. Either repay every penny you took from my education fund and gave to Michael, plus interest, or I'll file charges for financial fraud. My attorney has everything prepared. My mother sneered, trying to maintain control. You wouldn't dare. We're family. I laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Family? You forfeited the right to call us that when you tried to steal my house. But let me continue. I'm also filing for a restraining order against all of you. I have extensive evidence of emotional abuse, harassment, and break-in attempts. Finally, Michael found his voice. You can't do this to us. What about my wedding? Yes, Michael, let's talk about weddings, I replied coolly. While you were planning your extravagant celebration, I was documenting every threat, every manipulative message, every attempt to steal my property. The law firm I hired, which specializes in family financial abuse, finds your case particularly interesting. They've also uncovered some fascinating irregularities in your financial records. The IRS seems quite interested in certain tax matters, especially regarding undisclosed gifts to Michael. Silence descended over the park. Even the distant sounds of children playing seemed muted. My mother's face had moved from pale to ashen, and my father looked physically ill. This is what's going to happen, I continued, my voice calm and steady. Within 72 hours, you will deposit the full amount of my stolen college fund, plus interest, into my account. You will cease all communication with me, my husband, and my close friends and family. You will remove every social media post mentioning me and refrain from creating new ones. I looked directly at Michael. And you, golden child, your role ends here. I've forwarded information about your break-in attempt and subsequent threats to your employer's HR department. They were particularly interested in how this aligns with their company values. My mother's voice shook as she managed to say, Would you really destroy your own family for money? No, mother, I replied firmly. You destroyed this family through years of abuse and manipulation. I'm simply ensuring you can never harm me again and taking back what you stole. As I gathered my papers to leave, my father called out weakly, Lauren, please. I turned one final time. You had 20 years to say please. 20 years to defend me. 20 years to be a father. Time's up. The aftermath was exactly as I had anticipated. Within 48 hours, the full amount appeared in my account. All of my mother's social media posts about me vanished. Michael was placed on administrative leave while his company conducted an internal investigation. My grandfather later informed me that my father finally filed for divorce. Thomas and I upgraded our home security system with some of the returned funds, though we hardly needed it anymore. We also made a substantial donation to a charity organization supporting victims of family financial abuse. Turning their manipulation into something constructive for others felt right. According to my grandfather, who remains the only family member I still communicate with, my parents' social standing in their small town has completely collapsed. Once people learned the full truth, years of financial abuse and manipulation, not just my wedding, their carefully constructed image crumbled. Michael's fiancée ended their engagement after his company's investigation revealed the extent of his dishonesty. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt sometimes, but I know I made the right decision. Every morning when I wake up in my home, safe, secure, and impossible to steal, I'm reminded of that. Thomas and I are now planning an extravagant honeymoon, partially funded by my returned education money. There's a certain poetic justice in using their stolen funds to enhance my own happiness. In my home office, I've created a wall of achievements, my professional certifications, degrees earned through hard work, and a framed copy of the final bank transfer showing the returned college funds. It's not about the money, it's about saying enough and finally taking a stand. To anyone who might criticize me for being too harsh, for not attempting reconciliation or accepting apologies, forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation. Sometimes walking away and ensuring toxic people can never harm you again is the strongest thing you can do. I am not the villain in this story, despite their attempts to paint me as one. My house is mine. I am a woman who finally said no more. I own my life. I own my future. They tried to steal my house to pay for a wedding. They ended up losing far more than that. They lost their social standing and reputation, but more importantly, they lost any power they might have had over me. Thomas and I are thriving, surrounded by friends who genuinely care about us. We host dinner parties in our secure, expensive home. I've received 3 promotions at work since all this began, partly because I'm no longer carrying the emotional weight of their manipulation. Living well isn't always the best revenge. Sometimes it's holding those who tried to harm you accountable. My mother wanted to control the narrative. Well, she no longer has a story to steer. Michael wanted everything handed to him. He's now learning what it means to face consequences. My father wanted to be the passive observer, too helpless to stop it. He got to watch everything fall apart. I'm finishing this story not because there isn't more to tell, but because I'm ready to move on to the next chapter. One where I write all the words, and no one else gets to hold the pen. To everyone who supported me along the way, thank you. Remember, forgiveness and reconciliation aren't always necessary for a happy ending. Sometimes you have to say never again and stand your ground. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.